IAS Academy.
Hello all, welcome to IAS Academy and welcome back to the program Editorial Daily, where we deal with editorial analysis which enriches your perspective and enhances your answer writing. So let's get started with our today's session. Yes, today we are analyzing an opinion piece which is written by the senior advocate C. Sundaram, senior advocate in the Supreme Court of India. So the core subject of this opinion piece is the relationship between the state authority and political morality and the public accountability. Okay, so Mr. Sundaram has opens his argument by drawing a stark contrast between the historical norms of the governance and the contemporary political dynamics. Okay, when we see the historical paradigm of this in the early periods, basically what would happen is, in the early periods of this constitutional politics, the institutional heads, such as might be the railway ministry or anyone which is following major train accidents, disasters, took the moral responsibility. They have taken the moral responsibility and resigned. This is not negligibility because of a personal negligence, but because the principle of ultimate ministerial authority required it. Okay, now this is the early times one. Now when we see the contemporary shift today, that traditional sense of personal honor and the accountability has largely given way to the executive self aggrandizement. Okay, aggrandizement, so that the power retention and the political reluctance to accept the responsibility. So the central question has to be raised by this article is, what happens when an executive fails to self-regulate or acknowledge the institutional failures? This is the major question which has to be raised. Okay, okay. Now in this article, Mr. Sundaram identifies three major dynamics which is surrounding the recent youth-led protests over the high-risk examination failures, such as the NEET examinations. Okay, now in a healthy democracy, if we see, the accountability should ideally will be built. It should be built into the institutional processes. So, however, when an executive power becomes unchecked, even the fundamental duties like addressing the systemic rot in the educational sector requires the massive public protest to force a response from the state. So, the reparation of the damage and the taking serious and sincere measures to quell the rot in the education system required a protest of the magnitude on one has seen, to make the government decide to actually perform its duty, function, and the responsibility. Okay, now when we see into the central theme of the essay in the democratic principle in the popular sovereignty, the authoritarian structures often operate under the, you see this word, the authoritarianism. This authoritarian structures often operate under the assumption that the government or the ruling party is superior to the populace. Okay, populace, so that the state authority relies on compliance, fear, and the administrative coercion. Example like threats of reprisal or false legal actions. Okay, when the citizens collectively refuse to bow to fear, it serves as a structural reminder that the government officials are the public servants, not the masters. Okay, has to be considered. Now, when you see, one of the most significant aspects which is highlighted by the author in the what you called apolitical and non-sectarian nature of the student movement in this article, there, the author says the youth mobilized without the religious, political, or any artificial social divisions. And while the older generations often defaulted to compliance like this, the self comfort or fear of the unrest, the youth has demonstrated the moral courage to the challenging, overreaching authority. Okay, this is how the author has explained about the youth protests which have been taken place in the Delhi Jantar Mantar, in the sector of this apolitical and non-sectarian nature of the student movement in this article. Okay, now And to better digest this legal and the democratic arguments which is present in the article, let's look at how the author has contrasted the two models of the governance. What is that? We'll see. Coming to the two divisions which the author has given is the political accountability comparison. Accountability comparison. He gave in a two model concept. Like the first one is the traditional parliamentary model, traditional parliamentary morality model, and also the authoritarian or power centric model. Authoritarian or power centric model. Okay, in this we have generally seen in the previous thing in the traditional parliamentary model, where the ministerial is responsible, like the resignation on failure. The main priority is the public trust and the honor, which gives the responsive to the constitutional duty in the traditional parliamentary model. When coming to the authoritarian or the power centric model, if we see, the power is retained the despite institutional failure. Power is retained despite institutional failures, and the main priority now is being the executive self aggrandizement. Okay, executive self aggrandizement, which is the reluctant to the act without mass public mobilization. Okay, now this is what the author is mainly talking about. Okay, let us see this article in a complete detailed way about this traditional model and the authoritarian model of this thing. Okay, let us see. Executive responsibility and youth democratic engagement, which is the author C. Aryama Sundaram, who's a senior advocate in the Supreme Court of India. Okay, now political accountability, executive responsibility, and youth democratic engagement. This is the main editorial focus. Coming to the context of the article, the mass protest which is following the any NEET UGC examination catastrophe and the delayed institutional response from the executive authorities raise the critical questions on political accountability and the executive responsibility in India. This is the main context of the article. Now, when we see the syllabus, we can link this article to the GS paper 2, which is the polity paper, the Indian polity, constitution, governance, accountability, executive responsibility, and role of civil society. And also, we can link this article to our GS paper 4, which is ethics in the governance, the public accountability, integrity, moral courage, democratic values. Okay, now when we look into the core concept of this article, if we see that the first one is the erosion of the doctrine of ministerial responsibility. When we see the historical precedent, as we seen in Indian parliament democracy, the ministries took personal and the moral responsibility for the systemic failures within the department. Example, if we take the historical resignations, which is following major train accidents of the railway ministers, which is upholding the norms of honors and the administrative accountability. Okay, now what is the current shift of it? Today, the executive resignation and the systemic reforms are often delayed or they are resisted until the forced by large scale public outcry. So, or mass demonstrations rather than the undertaken voluntary as a matter of constitutional ethics. As of traditional thing, now the current shift has been happened to the taking up to the pride and prestige of the individual. Okay, now next, coming to the popular sovereignty and the democratic assertiveness, if we see in the constitutional principle, if we come across in a constitutional democracy, the citizens remain the ultimate authority. They becomes the ultimate authority, and elected or the appointed officials are the public servants. Okay, now overcoming the fear and apathy. Now what is happening, this mass student mobilization has signifies a shift away from fear of state pressure, such as the criminal charges, arbitrary increase, the arbitrary incarceration, or the administrative intimidation, all these, towards an active democratic assertion because of this protest. Okay, next, Coming to the secular and the transcendent youth mobilization, if we see unifying movement. So the youth response has transited from the artificial religious, political, or the social divides, which is forming a unified civil society push, which is focused on the institutional integrity. Just a second. Yes, institutional integrity, governance failures, and the educational equity. Okay, what is the role of civil society now? The role of civil society is it demonstrates how the student movements acts as a crucial check against the unchecked executive power when the formal institutional mechanism lack in enforcing the accountability. Okay, and yes, that is the main core concept of this article. When we see the key takeaways table, if we compare the dimensions with the observations, first is the constitutional ethos. When through the dimension of constitutional ethos, we can say the reassertion of the public sovereignty over the administrative indifference is the observation which we can take up. Or from the accountability, which is need to revive the political ethics and the ministerial responsibility without requiring mass protest to spur the administrative action. Okay, next, civil society and youth. In this dimension, if we see, it has to the observation main comes like the cross sectional non partition mobilization as a vital force for democratic checks and balances. Okay, now what is the key takeaway from this article? If we say, if we can take up, when an institution falter and when institutions falter and executive accountability erodes, the democratic vigilance of citizens, especially the youth, becomes the safeguard of the constitutional values and the public trust. Okay, now when we see this complete article at a glance, if we can see the ministerial responsibility from the honor driven resignations to the protest driven accountability. Okay, in the perspective of youth power from fear and apathy to active democratic assertion, and also the citizens as sovereign. The officials are public servants, but the citizens are the ultimate authority enough. And also the unity beyond divides, how the transcending religions, politics, and the social boundaries for the institutional integrity. And next is need for the ethical governance, which is reclaiming the constitutional values through the accountability and the transparency. Okay, now moving forward, let us see this historical precedence, a legal of accountability, a legacy of accountability. What is it? Basically, the Indian parliamentary democracy has seen ministries who are upholding the moral responsibility for the administrative failures. When we see the railway ministerial resignations, like the several railway ministers have been resigned or were sacked following the major train accidents. Example, if we take 1956 Arialur incident, 1964 the Sharnapur incident, and the 1981 Gisal train disaster. Based on these disasters, the railway ministers has been resigned. It is not that their own self-responsibility because of their negligence this train incidents has happened. Though the incidents has happened about based on the systemic negligences or whatever, they took the responsibility of resignation as they have been the ministers for particular department. Okay, next, upholding the norms of honor. So these actions has reflected a deep-seated commitment to administrative accountability, public trust, and the constitutional morality. Okay, next is the public trust in the institutions. Obviously, when such precedents has strengthened the people's faith in this democratic governance and the ministerial responsibility. So the doctrine of the ministerial's responsibility is not merely a legal requirement but a moral convert with citizens. Okay, next, when we see the modern challenges and concerns, we have seen the historical one. When we see the modern challenges and the concerns about it, the delayed accountability. Obviously, the executive action and the resignation are often delayed until a compelled by large scale public outrage or judicial interventions. Based on that only the resignations are going up, but previously based on the incidents itself, self resignations are being done. Now, institutional failures, examination leaks, irregularities, the poor regulation, and the opaque decision making, which has undermined the trust in the state institutions. Okay, next, the erosion of the ethical governance. Basically, a shift of voluntary accountability to the compiled accountability weakens the democratic norms and the constitutional ethics. And when we see in the perspective of normalization of apathy, the exception for the protesters to trigger the action risks has been normalizing the apathy and weakening the institutional credibility. So, the accountability delayed is accountability denied. This is what we have to remember. Ethics cannot be crowd sourced. Ethics cannot be crowd sourced. Okay, now when we look at the democratic significance of the youth mobilization, where from this article, if we see, awakening the democratic consequences, like youth are asserting their constitutional rights and demanding the accountability from the public authorities. Okay, and the cross social unity. What is this cross social unity? It is the mobilization transcendented religion, caste, the language, and the political affiliation, showing the power of issue based solidarity. Okay, next, check on the executive arbitrariness, like it acts as a vital check when the formal mechanisms, example, if we take the regulatory bodies, the oversight institutions, fail to act. Okay, next, voice for education equality, like demands for fair exams, transparency, and the equal opportunities reflect a commitment to merit and social justice. Okay, next, strengthening the civil society, like the student movement's nature, active citizenship, and strengthen the democratic fabric of the nation. And also, in the perspective of the reclaiming public institutions, a call to restore the integrity, credibility, and the people centric functioning in the state institutions is very much important. So, when youth rise for justice, the democracy thrives. Okay, these are few quotes and quotations which you have to remember or make a note of it, because they will be helpful in your writing your answer, and obviously in the ethics it would be very much important. Okay, next, when we see the key main analytic takeaways from this article, if we could take up the ministerial versus the individual responsibility, like the collective responsibility of the council of ministers is a cornerstone of parliamentary democracy. So, the culture of moral accountability appears to be declining when replaced by the defensive jurisdictions and the blame shifting. Okay, next, role of public protest in governance, which is the civil society movements fill the accountability vacuum when the institutional redressal systems fail. So the protest acts as a democratic pressure valve and the crystal for systemic reforms, catalyst for the systemic reforms. Okay, now preserving the institutional trust, like the repeated failures erode the public, especially the youth, the confidence in the government, exam bodies, and the oversight mechanisms, which is restoring the trust which is required, the transparency, accountability, and time bounded corrective action. Okay, now these are the main key takeaway analytics which we can take out from this article. Now let us see the way forward for this, like revive the ethical governance. How? To uphold the ministerial responsibility voluntarily as a matter of constitutional morality. Okay, this has to be there. And then strengthen the oversight mechanism. How? To empower the independent bodies like the CAG, CVC, the parliamentary committees to monitor and ensure the accountability, and also ensure the transparency in the examinations. The reforming the examination systems with the robust security, digitalization, and the strict penalties for malpractices has to be happen. Next, institutionalize the mental health support, provide the accessible counseling and the psychological support in schools, colleges, and the coaching hubs. Okay, next, encourage the youth participation. create a platform for youth dialogue, grievance redressals, and the policy the consultations. Okay, this is what encouraging the youth participation. Next, build a culture of accountability, like promote an ethical leadership, the public service values, and the civic responsibility at all levels. Okay, now there are few practice questions here. If you could see, the first one is the discuss the doctrine of ministerial responsibility in the parliamentary democracy, how it is relevant in the contemporary India. This is the first question. And the second question is, how do youth led movements strengthen the democratic practices in India? Examine the recent examples. Okay, next. The third question would be, examine the impact of the repeated exam irregularities on youth mental health and the institutional trust. Okay, and the fourth question will be, critically analyze the role of civil society and as a check on the executive power in a democracy. Okay, next. Next is, what reforms can be undertaken to ensure the fairness, transparency, and the accountability in the high stakes examinations. Okay, these are the five questions which we have given for the mains. Write down these questions and do ping us back to the Telegram channel, to our Telegram ID. We will see the answers and give you all the feedback. Okay, now let us move on to the next article. As a socialist and a policy analyst, we need to ask a question like, what lies beneath the immediate outrage over the paper leaks. So this article basically we are which we are analyzing today highlights a critical thesis, like, while the protesters has a focus on paper leaks and the administrative resignations, the systemic crisis defined by rising the student suicides and the intensive psychological stress and the steep financial burden of the commercialized entrance coaching, which is remains the largely unaddressed. Okay, now the article basically says that need to shift the focus to rising student suicides cost of education. This is what the article is talking about. Okay, now let us look at the empirical evidence which is provided by the data from the accidental deaths and suicides in India. ASADSI. Okay, accidental deaths suicides in India, which reports it by the NCRB. NCRB, that is National Crime Records Bureau, and the CMSCE 2025 survey. Okay, now when we check into the reality of the student suicide in 2004, from 2014 to 2024, over 1.23 lakhs of students has lost their lives in the suicide between the year 2014 to 2024. So the total annual student suicides rose roughly around 80%, which is jumping from, basically previously it is 8068 in 2014, but while coming to 2024, now it rose to 14,448, which is a very drastic number. So over 25,000 students have suicides in the decade, were directly attributed to the failure in the examination. So averaging over 2,000 deaths per year, averaging over 2,000 deaths per year. So with 2021 as a minor statistical exceptions. So out of those who died by suicide due to exam failure, 55 percentage were under the age of 18, and however 42% are between 18 to 30 years. Okay, this is a very bad thing. Not like paper leaks and all, the students are committing suicides because of their failures. Okay, now a narrow fun, like when we see over 20 lakh students appear for NEET annual examination, which is rising to over 22.7 lakhs in recent years. Less than 57 percentage registered candidates qualify. Out of all these candidates, only 57 percentage will qualify the examination, creating an immense structural bottleneck where the vast number of aspirants face the repeating exam years or the facing the rejections. So Why does a high stakes exam transfer into a mental health crisis? We can categorize this systemic drivers into the three main areas. Like, if we see the structural crisis in the education, the structural crisis in the education can be categorized into three main areas. Like, the first one, if we can see, the psychological and the social pressure. Just a second, I hope you all can't see this. Yes, yeah, the psychological and social pressure. And second thing which we can classify is the financial and the commercial strain. Financial and commercial strain. And then the last perspective is the what you called institutional inhume practices. Institutional inhume practices. In these three areas, we can categorize the systemic drivers. So, when we see the psychological and the social pressure, the exams like NEET and this has become a social symbol of hyper competition, where the failure is often internalized by students as the personal failure rather than a result of structural scarcity. So, too few medical seats for millions of aspirants has been there. Okay, when we look into the concept of this financial and commercialization strains, the coaching industry, when we look into a very special category, to compete in the private coachings has become a particularly mandatory rather than optional. So data shows that over 35 percentage of the secondary and the higher education students attend the private coaching. So this private coaching expenses account for approximately one third of the household's entire education expenditure, which is placing the severe financial stress on the working and the middle class families. Okay, now, yes, when we look into this institutional overreach and lack of empathy, the inhuman security checks at the examination centers, the sudden cancellations, delayed results, and the repeated re examinations add the immense uncertainty to the already fragile student demographics. Okay, this is what the article is basically talking about, the suicide of the students and all. Let us see this article in a complete detailed way. Yes, the topic is high stakes examination risking the students rising the students suicides and commercialization of the education. The author of this article is based on the Hindu editorial. Okay, so the editorial basically focuses on high stack examinations, which is rising the student suicide and the commercialization of the education. Okay, now, coming to the context of the topic, if we see the protest by the Cockroach Janata Party, the CJP, over the paper leak in NEET has concluded after the government concessions. Like, however, beyond the administrative failures, the deeper structural crisis persists, including the mental health burden, hyper competition, and the escalating financial cost of coaching. Okay, this is the main context of the article. When we look into the syllabus, how can we link this article to our syllabus is GS paper 2, we can link this article to the issue relating to the development and the management of social sector or the services relating to the education, human resources. And also for GS paper 4, that is the ethics paper, the ethics and human values, human dignity, comparison, and the empathy values in the public life. Okay, now when we look into the core concept and the key arguments in this article, first is the context and background. If we see the political context, the protest has led by the Cockroach Janata Party, that is the CJP, over the accountability of paper leaks in NEET has concluded following the government concessions. Okay, systemic issue. What is the systemic issue? Beyond the immediate administrative failures like the question paper leaks, the broader structural crisis persists, like the mental health, the burden on the aspirants, high competition, and the escalating financial cost of private coaching. Okay, now when we see the key data and the trends on students' suicides, if we see the overall surge, the total students increased by approximately 80% over a decade. Okay, the student suicides has increased approximately to 80% over a decade, which is rising from 8,068 in 2014 to 14,488 in 2024. So overall, 1.23 lakh students lost their lives in suicide in India between 2014 to 2024. Okay, so what is the impact of this failure in the examination? Failure in examination has accounted for 21%. That is more than one-fifth of the students' suicides between 2014 to 2024. So cumulatively, over 25,000 students died by suicide due to exam failure in this decade, which is averaging over 2,000 student deaths per year. Okay, with 2021 as the sole exception. Coming to the demographic breakdown, if we see, 55% of those who died by suicide due to examination failure were under age of 18, whereas 42% belong to the age of 18 to 30 years of age group. Okay, now this is the key data and the trends of student suicides which we can see in this article. Next is hyper competitive bottlenecks. If we see, the over 20 lakh students appear for the NEET examination, and annually over 15 lakh students have registered for NEET every year since 2015. So low qualification rate, how can we say? Less than 57% out of those who are applied, less than 57% of those registered make it pool of qualified candidates, which is creating a intense structural pressure. Okay, next, coming to the proliferation and the financial burden of coaching, high dependency. Over 35% of the secondary and higher secondary students attend the private coaching classes for NEET coaching, and also escalating the cost, like coaching has become expensive, which is accounting for roughly one third of the household's total education expenditure. Okay, and obviously the repeat of culture is also becoming a very habitat, like need for the multi-year drop or the repeat attempts inflates the cumulative financial strain on families. And coming to the administrative flaws, if we see, the issues like paper leaks, severe exam center frisking protocols, and the irregularities in the scoring patterns further compare the student anxiety. Okay, now what is the key takeaway from, if we see the data summary table, just a second, yeah, you can see, yes, when we look into the data summary table, when you see the metrics and details and the sources from where we have got this data is, the students suicide growth from 2014 to 2024 increased from 88,068 to 14,488, which is approximately 80% of growth, which is given by NCRB ADSI report. Okay, now share due to exam failure. The share due to exam failure, which is the 21% of the student suicide, approximately more than 25,000 total deaths have been reported. This was given by the NCRB ADSI report. The same. Next, age vulnerability breakdown, that is the 55% of less than 18 years of age, and 42% of age between 18 to 30, which is given by the ADSI data of 2014 to 2024. Next, NEET qualification yield. This data was given by NTA data, which is less than 57% of the total registered candidates only are being selected for the NEET examination. Okay, next, coaching practitioner participation rate. This coaching participation rate, which is the 37% of the overall at higher secondary levels, that is approximately 44.6% urban and 33.1% of rural students have been going to the coachings, that was given by CMSE 2025. Okay, at a glance, if we see, 1.23 lakh students have lost their lives to suicide from 2014 to 2025, and approximately 80% increase in the student suicides has been seen in 2014 to 2024. Okay, now and also 25,000 plus of students died due to the exam failure specifically. Okay, and also 55% of victims were under 18 years of age, and one third of household education expenditure was being costed to the coaching centers. Okay, now the major key takeaway from this article we can see is the high stack exams like papers of paper leaks and the commercialization of coaching are creating an intense psychological and the financial stress, which is leading to a surge in students suicides, which is urgent policy reforms has to be taken, the mental health support has to be given, and the regulatory oversight are imperative very much. Okay, this is the key takeaway from this article. When we see the psychological and the social impact, first is the mental health burden. Obviously, the continuous pressure to perform leads to the anxiety, depression, stress, and in the extreme cases, the student will be committing suicide. This is what the mental health burden which we can talk about. Next, impact on the families. Who knows, like who will be ready to lose their son or a daughter because of this exam leaks, the exams, re-exams, or by mental disturbance of the health of the son or a daughter. So it impacts a family very much. Like not only this, it will give a financial burden, the social stigma, and the emotional trauma which affects the entire family and the communities. Okay, loss of human potential. Like India loses the talented young minds in their formative years, like impacting the national productivity and the demographic dividend. Next is inequality in opportunity. Urban and the affluent students have better access to coaching and resources, widening the socio-economic divide. So, exam failure is not the end of life. Every child needs a support, not pressure. Okay? Yes. Next is when we see in a perspective of stakeholders and their roles, when we see the government should ensure the exam integrity and the transparency and regulate the coaching industries effectively and strengthen the mental health infrastructure for the students. This is what the government has to do. Next, coming to the educational institutions, basically the educational institutions have to identify at risk students early, because everyone will be coming to the institutes. This educational institutions are very much responsible to see the students who are at high risks and also provide the academic support and the counseling and promote the holistic learning and not the rote competition. Okay, next, parents also even manage their expectations and avoid the comparison. Basically this comparison is one of the biggest thing that the parents are doing now. They'll compare his son or daughter with someone else who have qualified the NEET, and you couldn't qualify. She is sitting for this much time, you are sitting for this much time, but you are unable to clear. These comparisons will give a mental pressure to the students. So parents have to manage their expectations also and avoid the comparison and provide the emotional support and encouragement to the the children, and focus on child well-being and over marks. Okay, next, coming to the coaching institutions, they have to ensure the ethical practices and the reasonable fees, and also provide the mentorship and stress management, avoid creating the unrealistic success narratives to the students. So students also have to be like, they have to focus the study but not taking that very emotionally, or they have to maintain that balance. If they have to find paths for success, not that only this path gives me success. Don't rely on only single path. Okay, so a collaborative approach is very essential to build a supportive and human education ecosystem. Okay, now, and there are few key main analysis takeaways which we can take out from this examination, sorry, from this article, is the socio-economic dilemma. Like, see, the commercialization of this coaching has creates an unequal playing field which is disadvantaging the rural and the low income students, and so places unstable financial strains on the middle class families. Okay, next, policy imperatives, like the need to move beyond the high stakers single shot examinations, shift towards the holistic evolution and the multiple pathways to success. Okay, next, coming to the mental health priority, institutionalize the counseling networks, example the telemanners in schools and coaching hubs, and also train the educators and the mentors to identify and support the stressed students. Also coming to the regulatory oversight, if we see, enforce the strict regulation of private coaching institutions and ensure the transparency in fee and also results and marketing practices. Okay, next, building a supportive ecosystem. This is very much important. It has to foster a value based education system that prioritizes the well being, curiosity, and the self life and life skills, and also encourage the alternative career options and the designatize the failure. Okay. Yes. So examination should be a means to opportunity, not a measure of self worth. Okay. This is one of the thing we can see. And coming to the way forward and key recommendations, if we see, in this way forward, we can say the reforms again assessment, the reform assessment systems like introduce a continuous and comprehensive evaluation which is reducing the dependency on single high stack exams. Next, strengthen the mental health support, like scale up the telemanners, school counselors, and the the peer support programs which across the states. Next, regulate the coaching industry. Obviously, implement the national regulatory frameworks for fee structures, faculty credentials, and the working hours are also have to be taken. Okay, next, financial support mechanism. Provide scholarship, interest free loans, and the subsidies to reduce the financial barriers for quality education. And also career guidance and the awareness. This has to be promote the awareness about the diverse career options, not only need after behalf of need, rather than need, there are many other options also. This has to be told to the students. Only NEET, MBBS, not only this after intermediate, there are many more opportunities which we can grab. Okay, so career options has to be uh, told to the students, the awareness has to be there, and the skill development from the early stages also has to be there. Okay, now when we look up to the challenges, the cultural pressure, like the high societal and the parental expectations makes the changes difficult, and also the commercial interest like coaching industries, economic cloud, and may resist the stringent regulations, and also implementation gaps like lack of this trained counselors, infrastructure, and the monetary mechanisms is one of the main challenge. Next, awareness and the stigma. Limited awareness about the mental health and the stigma around seeking from help continues. Okay, next, equity concerns. Obviously, by bridging the rural, urban, and the digital divide in the access to equal quality resources. And yes, there are few main questions for this article. If we see, the first one is examine the link between the commercialization of education and rising student subsidies in India, suicides in India. This is what the first question talks about. Okay, next, the second is critically analyze the effectiveness of policy measures in addressing the mental health crisis among the students. Next is discuss the role of regulation in private coaching institutions and what reforms are required for it. This is the another question. And the next question is high stake exams have become a source of stress rather than opportunity. Discuss. Okay, next. Next question, how can India create an education ecosystem that is competitive yet comprehensive? It compensate this, discuss about it. Okay, next, the last one is what multi-dimensional approach is needed to prevent the student suicides in India? These are the 5 questions which we can take out from this article and we have given. And do write these answers for these questions and do ping us back to the Telegram channel so that we can analyze your answer and give you the feedback. Okay. Yes. And yes, these are the two articles for today as we discussed about the NEET exam paper leaks, the authorization, and the what you called the student suicides and all. We have seen a large data, so read this editorial PDF back so that you'll be remembering the data well from this student suicide article, which is very important in your prelims perspective and in the mains perspective also. So yes, I hope everyone liked this video. To get this PDF, you can download it from our website. The link is provided in the description below. And do like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more editorial analysis. And do follow our Instagram and Telegram IDs for your UPSC preparation. Okay, all the links of this websites have been provided in the description below. Do check it out. So I'll see you all tomorrow with another editorial analysis. Thank you.